The canopy of twinkle lights shimmered over a long table set with hand-tied florals and vintage china. Jazz drifted through the warm Asheville air, the kind that clung sweet and slow to your skin. It was my parents' 45th anniversary, and they'd spared no detail: an open bar, a private chef, and even a harpist who switched to piano when the wind picked up. I sat near the end of the table, as usual, out of frame for the family photographer, but close enough to refill wine glasses. That's where they always placed me, the extra hands spot, the quiet one. Brenna sat near the center, right where the light caught her best. She was wearing a silk cream dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her blonde hair coiled into some effortlessly expensive updo. She's the owner of Birch and Ember, a boutique candle chain with names like Divorce in Provence and Trust Fund Fig. She makes more off Instagram posts than I do in a month. And she loves an audience. She'd already told 3 stories, one about a celebrity who walked into her Manhattan shop, one about being featured in a Women to Watch article, and one about how her therapist says she's too humble for her own good. The guests laughed politely. My dad nodded along, proud. My mom gave her signature tight smile, the kind she wears when she's trying not to look too pleased. Then dessert came out, fig tarts with lavender cream, and Brenna stood up with her glass. She didn't clink a fork to get attention. She never needed to. She raised her glass just high enough and smiled wide. "To family," she said, "to staying close even when some of us don't always pull our weight." A soft ripple of laughter passed through the table like a breeze that suddenly turns cold. The kind of laugh people do when they're not sure if they're in on the joke or part of it. My dad chuckled. My mom looked down. Brenna's husband grinned like he'd heard it before. I didn't laugh. I set my dessert fork down gently on my plate. I folded my hands in my lap. And then I looked up, slowly, deliberately, meeting Brenna's eyes across the candlelight. "Dead weight," I said, not loud but clear. "Doesn't wire payroll for 3/4 straight." The jazz stopped. I hadn't realized the harpist had paused. Brenna blinked. A few heads turned in slow motion. Someone across from me coughed. No one spoke. I stood up. The legs of my chair scraped hard against the flagstone patio. It sounded louder than it should have, but no one moved. I pushed my napkin onto the table, still folded, and looked toward the garden gate. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. No one was going to stop me, and we all knew it. As I stepped past the table, past the string lights and the curated memory-making, the only sound was my heels on the bricks. Steady, sharp, final. By the time I reached the street, the air felt cooler, like it had shed something too. They didn't know it yet, but that was the night everything shifted. Not because of what she said, but because I finally said something back. And I didn't look back. I was 15 the first time I understood what silence could cost. The kitchen door was cracked just enough for me to hear my mother's voice, panicked and sharp, a tone she usually reserved for hospital bills and car repairs. My dad had lost another contract, and the mortgage was due in less than a week. There was no yelling, just that tight, clipped whisper she used when she was trying not to cry. I was shelving cookbooks at Pinecrest Books after school back then, $6.50 an hour, under the table. I'd saved just over $700 by hoarding lunch money, skipping movie nights, and saying no when friends invited me anywhere that cost more than bus fare. That night, I pulled the envelope from my dresser drawer, counted the bills one more time, and slipped it onto my dad's desk. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The next morning, the envelope was gone. He didn't say thank you. He just ruffled my hair at breakfast and muttered, "You're dependable, kiddo." That was the first time I funded the family, and I didn't even have a driver's license yet. By the time I turned 17, I was working 2 jobs, weekends at the bookstore and weekday evenings bussing tables at a diner that smelled permanently like grease and bleach. The money I made never stayed with me long. It went toward gas for the family car, prescription refills, a new water heater. When Dad's old drafting tools fell apart and he needed replacements to pick up a new client, I handed him $500 in cash. He patted me on the shoulder and said, "You're like our little safety net." Like that was a compliment. When Brenna turned 18, she got a brand new car for her birthday. Cherry red, white leather interior, custom license plate with her initials. My dad called it a reward for her ambition. My mom teared up when she pulled into the driveway, squealing with joy. No one mentioned the envelope I'd left on the desk, or the water heater, or the pills, or the tools. At 19, I got into a study abroad program in Belgium, a partial scholarship. It was the first thing I'd ever applied to without telling anyone, the first time I'd allowed myself to want something just for me. I remember sitting on the front porch with the acceptance letter in my hand, rereading the words until they blurred. I felt like I was holding a key to another version of my life. But Brenna had fallen behind on tuition again. Something about unexpected fees and the apartment near campus being unreasonable but aesthetic. My father sat me down with that same tired gaze. Family helps family, he said. So I didn't fight. I didn't even hesitate. I wired $4,800 from the Belgium fund directly into her student account. A week later, she posted a picture from a beach trip with the caption, "Self-care is survival." That became a pattern. She self-cared, I survived. At her graduation party, I paid for the catered spread and the wine she said would elevate the vibe. My name wasn't on the program. At her wedding, I footed the deposit on the venue. At her baby shower, I covered the event planner. I gave and gave and gave. They called me helpful, steady, the good one. But never Elena, never by my name. It wasn't love, it was usage. And deep down, I knew it. Still, I kept giving. Because when you're raised to think that usefulness equals worth, silence starts to sound a lot like devotion. But that silence, it had an expiration date. And it was coming. It was a Tuesday night. Quiet. I just finished a grant proposal that had taken me all day, and I was curled up in bed, tea cooling on the nightstand, half a novel open on my chest. The apartment was still, peaceful in the kind of way that comes after years of noise. Then my phone buzzed. Brenna, 11:14 p.m. I let it ring twice, then picked up. "Hey you," she said, her voice all sugar and shine, like we'd just had brunch that morning. "You up for a little chat?" I didn't say anything, just waited. "So," she said, stretching the word like it was a sales pitch. "The candle line's blowing up. Birch and Ember just got featured in a holiday guide, and there's this space opening next door to my flagship store in Brooklyn." She paused like she expected applause. "The bank's offering a credit line for expansion, $80,000. All I need is a cosigner." There it was. She said it like she was asking for a ride to the airport. "Just a signature," she added quickly. "Nothing crazy. I've got this covered. You've always been amazing with numbers. Come on, Elena, you know I wouldn't ask if it weren't important." I sat up, the weight of her words settling fast. $80,000 isn't nothing, Brenna." "Oh my God," she laughed. "You're so dramatic. You don't even have a mortgage or kids. You're not curing cancer. What do you even do with your money, honestly?" That one hit me right in the sternum. I didn't yell, didn't cry, just breathed in and said no. There was a pause, thick and sudden. "No, as in you won't help me?" she asked, voice sharper now. "No," I said again, "as in I won't co-sign a loan for someone who hasn't repaid me for anything. Not once." Her tone shifted fast, all the fake lightness gone. "Are you seriously being selfish right now?" The word landed like a slap. Selfish. Me. The person who paid for her degree, her wedding, her staff's wages, her health insurance during lockdown. Selfish. I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself. I just ended the call. Then I sat in the dark, staring at the screen, my heart thudding in this strange, unfamiliar rhythm. Not rage, not sorrow. Relief. After a moment, I swung my legs out of bed, padded barefoot to my desk, and powered up my laptop. I clicked through the folders until I reached the one I'd quietly named Backbone. It was password protected. I typed it in without hesitation. Inside, a digital paper trail I had curated over 10 years. PDFs of tuition payments, bank transfers, screenshots of Zelle receipts, loan documents, business filings, vendor emails, all of it. At the very bottom, a notarized contract. March 2017. One desperate phone call, one emergency meeting over chai lattes in her tiny kitchen. She had signed it without reading the last page. Her hand had been shaking. Ownership stake 52%, Elena Marin. I hadn't reminded her. I never needed to. She didn't remember what she gave me that day. But I never forgot what it cost me to keep her afloat. The folder glowed on my screen like a lighthouse. Not a threat, not a weapon. A boundary. And soon she'd know exactly where it was drawn. I didn't plan to go back, not after that night. But something in me needed to end it where it started. The next morning, I drove to the family house, past the rows of dogwood trees, past the stone gate with our last name carved into it like legacy couldn't be questioned. The garden was still littered with the remnants of celebration. Folding chairs, half-melted candles, floral centerpieces gone limp overnight. My mother was in the sunroom pretending to scroll through her tablet. My father was reading the paper. Brenna was seated at the kitchen island in activewear, sipping something green and smug. They all looked up when I stepped inside. "Elena," my mom said, startled but trying to soften it. "We weren't expecting you." I walked straight to the dining table, the same one from the night before, and placed the leather-bound folder gently on the wood. I didn't sit, didn't ask if they had time. This wasn't a conversation, it was an unveiling. Brenna rolled her eyes. "What is this now?" I flipped open the cover. Receipts, wire transfers, loan agreements, tuition payments, health insurance records, the lease she begged me to co-sign, the rent I quietly covered for 3 months during the lockdown, payroll stubs I funded under the table to avoid her staff walking out. Then came the final page, the notarized contract. March 2017. Brenna stared at it, blinking like she wasn't sure what she was looking at. What is this supposed to mean? I didn't raise my voice, I didn't need to. It means I've been financing your life, your business, and your stability for over a decade. It means I own 52% of Birch and Ember. It means the person you called dead weight is the reason your lights stayed on. My father stood up slowly, his hands clenched at his sides. You're humiliating your sister. I looked at him, calm, measured. No, I'm correcting the record. Brenna's face twisted. This is revenge, that's what this is. I shook my head. This is a receipt for every time you acted like I was invisible while living off my bank account. My mother made a soft sound, almost like a plea. Elena, we didn't know. I turned to her, my expression unflinching. You didn't want to know. That's different. I let the weight of that sit. You always called me reliable, practical, the one who made things easier, but none of you ever asked what it cost me to be that person. Brenna's voice cracked. You could have said something. I did, I said, voice tightening. Every time I said yes, I was saying everything. Silence. Real silence this time. Not the kind that covers discomfort with polite laughter, but the kind that makes everyone aware of their own reflection. I reached for the folder, closed it slowly. You wanted to know how I felt? I said, echoing her toast from the night before. This is how it feels, to be used up and discarded like a worn-out checkbook, to be needed but never valued. Brenna opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I looked at my parents one last time. I thought being useful was the same as being loved, I said. Turns out it was just convenient. Then I turned, walked back down the same garden path, past the candles, past the party that had never really been for me. No one followed. No one called my name. And this time, I didn't hope they would. The envelope came on a rainy Tuesday. It was thick, heavy even, like it knew what it carried. Inside, legal stationery with my name printed clean across the top, and just beneath it, the words that made me stop breathing for a beat. Notice of civil action, filed by Brenna Morgan. She was suing me. Her claim? That I had manipulated her into signing over a controlling interest in her business while she was emotionally vulnerable and financially distressed. That I'd preyed on her trust, breached family boundaries, and acted with undue influence. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a warning shot. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I called Laura, my friend from grad school, who gave me the number for a lawyer she trusted, Margot Shaw. Margot didn't flinch. She read everything, every email, every wire transfer, every notarized page, and then she looked up at me and said, "This isn't a case. This is noise, but we'll still show up ready." The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. When I entered the courtroom, it felt smaller than I imagined. Fewer pews, fewer people. But the air was tight, like it knew something was about to come loose. Brenna sat at the plaintiff's table, designer blazer, nude lipstick, not a hair out of place. Her attorney looked slick, too slick, like a man who had written more invoices than briefs. My father sat behind them, arms crossed, jaw clenched. My mother wasn't there. They didn't look at me. Her lawyer started with a performance, said I had exploited a fragile time, that I had orchestrated control through quiet manipulation, that I'd blurred the lines between sister and creditor, and left Brenna with no real understanding of what she had signed. Then Margot stood. She didn't posture, she didn't raise her voice. She walked the judge through our records, page by page. The business account I personally saved from overdraft, the emergency payrolls I covered, the handwritten note from Brenna thanking me for saving her from drowning, the time-stamped emails, the contract, clear, notarized, signed with no pressure, no coercion. This wasn't exploitation, Margot said calmly. It was survival, and my client was the reason her sister is still in business. She let the words settle like dust. The judge didn't ask many questions. He just looked from one table to the other and said, "Motion to dismiss is granted." Just like that. No drama, no outburst, just done. Brenna looked stunned, like someone had pulled a rug she hadn't realized she'd been standing on. Outside, the spring air had turned warm again. Margot shook my hand and said, "You're free." But as I walked to my car, I realized something else had ended too. Not just the case, not just the financial burden, but the part of me that still wanted them to care, still waited for an apology, still believed I could fix something that had always been broken. There were no texts, no calls, no holiday card from my mother that year, not even the usual one with the dog in front of the fireplace. And for the first time, I didn't ache from the silence. I welcomed it. Because silence, when it's finally yours, doesn't feel like absence. It feels like peace. I didn't celebrate the dismissal. I didn't go out for wine or text the news to anyone. I just went home. And for the first time in a long time, that word, home, meant something more than just a place I paid for. It meant something quiet, something earned. The next morning, I reopened the box I hadn't touched in years. Inside, brushes, canvases, tubes of oil paint that had stiffened with time. The smell of turpentine rose like memory. I stretched a blank canvas across my easel. There was no plan. I didn't sketch. I didn't measure. I just moved color. It wasn't about making something good. It was about making something mine. Some days I painted for hours. Other days, I left the brush in the water overnight and didn't feel guilty. For the first time, my worth wasn't measured by what I gave. One morning, an email popped up from a woman I barely remembered. We'd worked together once on a nonprofit grant years ago. She was organizing a regional women's leadership summit in Charleston. The theme was rebuilding without permission. She wrote, "We're looking for someone to speak about boundaries, about what it means to walk away from something that once defined you. I thought of you immediately." I sat with the message for 2 days. Then I typed, "Yes, I'll do it." When the day came, the room was filled with women, some in crisp suits, some in sneakers, some in quiet grief. I stood behind the podium, no notes in front of me, hands shaking just slightly. Then I began. "For most of my life," I said, "I believed value came from what you could carry for other people, their dreams, their debts, their silence. I was the helper, the fixer, the one who gave without asking for anything in return. But the greatest thing I ever gave was permission, to myself, to say no. I didn't name names. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about weight, and how good it felt to finally put it down. When I finished, the applause wasn't thunderous, but it was real. A woman in the front row nodded through tears. Another one stood like she was unfolding her own voice. Afterward, they came to me, not with business cards, but with stories. About sisters, husbands, mothers, sons, bank accounts, burnout, awakening. That night, I walked home under a sky wide with stars, paint still under my fingernails, name tags still clipped to my blouse. I passed the bookstore where I shelved paperbacks at 15. The lights were on. A girl stood inside, arranging a display. She looked a little like me, but I didn't stop, because that girl was never seen. I kept walking. No more saving people from themselves. No more bleeding quietly. I didn't become famous. I didn't become rich. But I became free. And that was enough. Sometimes the quietest battles are the ones we fight the longest, inside our homes, inside ourselves. If you've ever been the one who gave too much, who stayed silent too long, who carried the weight so others could walk light, then maybe it's time to ask, who's carrying you? This story isn't just about betrayal, it's about reclaiming your name, your worth, your boundaries. And knowing that saying no doesn't make you cruel, it makes you clear. You don't have to burn bridges, but you do have permission to stop rebuilding them for people who never crossed them to reach you. If this story touched something in you, let it be your beginning. Because here on Sweet Revenge, Happy Ending, we believe the strongest revenge is a life reclaimed, and a peace that no one else gets to steal.